Hey, thank you very much, Savannah. Thank you to the team too for helping facilitate this. Welcome everyone. I am Andy McIsaac, Marketing Director for the Public Sector here at Alteryx. This is the session on optimizing enrollment outcomes with analytics for all. I know if you're working at a college or a university, it's probably a quieter time of year as most of your students have gone home for the summer, and you have a little bit of an opportunity to do a little bit of learning and exploration and learning a little bit more about analytics. So I know it's almost the 4th of July, so summer up here in New England is just about ready to kick off. I know I'm looking forward to it, and hope you are too. So thank you very much for joining us today, and it is my pleasure to also welcome Jen Cox and Emily Chase Coleman from HAI Analytics, one of our partners here at Alteryx. So when you look at when you look at data and analytics and AI, they are the foundations for digital technology and transformation, and they're really necessary, for digital resiliency across all dimensions. Whether you're in higher education, whether you're in the public sector, whether you're in the private sector, right? Whether it's finance, whether it's customers or students or ecosystems or even leadership itself, it's critical to have a capability that's based upon data analytics and AI in order to really enable digital transformation. When you look specifically at colleges and those who work for colleges and universities know this, student life cycle management is really what it's all about, right? Data plays a significant role in student life cycle management, not only addressing the needs around all the critical business functions that make up student life cycle management, from marketing to admissions to enrollment, to looking at programs and student retention and ultimate graduation and alumni as well. There are also a number of significant challenges that colleges and universities have had to navigate and are probably still navigating now. Staffing challenges and inflation, reduced federal pandemic relief, more reliance on tuition revenue, more pressure to meet diversity and inclusion goals. The supply of seats is outstripping the demand in a lot of cases, and you must continually align value with workforce needs. And educational pathways are becoming more diverse than ever, giving students opportunities to pursue education, maybe not in necessarily traditional forms. When you look at data and analytics, and we say it makes up a critical component of any digital capability that a college or university wants to have, most organizations and college universities too will say that they're investing heavily in data and analytics and AI. But many organizations are going to say we're investing heavily. 92% of organizations say that. 19% feel that they're really becoming truly data driven. So what are some of the causes that is causing this, what we perceive as the analytics gap? One of the things is that there's a growing divide between people and technology. We find that most investments in higher analytic or data functions are focused on data science teams. These are very important teams, but there's not enough data scientists. There are too few data scientists to do all the data work and analytics that needs to happen. Many data scientists, while they have a strong background in coding and statistics and mathematics, they may lack some of the key domain knowledge necessary to look at solving problems with data. And then many projects are not implemented because it takes a lot of excessive coding, there's maybe not trust in the overall analytic process. And many data scientists find themselves being stuck in the role of having to be a data janitor and cleaning up data and making it available for analysis. And then on the other side, you have your knowledge workers, those domain experts, the people who know the questions to ask, who know what data they'd like to have, but aren't necessarily given the tools to enable them to become more self-sufficient in the analytic process. Asking things, what are our student conversion rates? What's driving our student attrition? Why are our yield rates dropping? How are we doing with net tuition revenue? Or can we automate these processes so I don't have to be doing the same manual type of work to produce a static report month on month or maybe day after day? So when you look at what needs to happen from a data science and machine learning perspective, Gartner has put out because data is moving so fast and becoming so critical, key trends such as augmentation and democratization are really critical. So in support the needs of what's really becoming a diverse group of technical and non-technical roles, data and analytics leaders really need to look at applying multi-persona data science and machine learning platforms, enabling really the team aspect of analytics to take hold, and not making data science and analytics the sole domain of people like classically trained data scientists. So really expanding the aperture and allowing more people to participate in the analytic process. Analytic approaches definitely need to change. Right now, what we see is that a lot of analytics is applied only to experts. It's only made available to them. There's still a lot of manual processes, the cutting and pasting of data from one spreadsheet to another. There's silo analytic tools, one analytic tool to measure enrollment, one analytic tool to measure student performance, one analytic tool to track capital campaign management. And there's also limited data and rigid architecture that create those silos. What it results in is that you have an analytic process that, for the most part, is error prone, it's insecure, and is really slow to create the insights that dynamic organizations such as college and universities need to keep ahead of competition and remain competitive. What really needs to happen is you need analytic approaches that are focused on all personas, that enable self-service, that have automated insights driven by AI and machine learning, end-to-end analytics, where analytics, whether it's prep and blend, ETL, to descriptive, to predictive, to descriptive analytics, and even geospatial and natural language processing can all be done in one platform. And data is available regardless of what format it's in. It can be ingested into the end-to-end analytic platform to make real-time, automated, and accurate insights available to the entire organization. And just a reminder, to get your CPA credit, please make sure you fill out the polling questions that you'll see up on your screen. So from an Alteryx perspective, what we really believe is that you need to make analytics available for all. And that means making analytics easy, the ability to execute every task in minutes or hours, not in days or weeks. And an analytic capability that covers everything from insights to action across every data type and source. So you shouldn't be stymied by the fact that you have data that's in a spreadsheet or data that's in a legacy system or some other specialized system. You should be able to leverage that data for the analysis that you need to answer the business challenges that your particular department or organizations face. And the analytics needs to be everywhere. You'll be able to deploy that across hundreds of different use cases, and in a college or higher ed perspective, anything from applications to admissions, to enrollment, to student retention, to alumni management, and so forth. Those are all valid and important use cases for a college or university. But can your analytic platform support all those different use cases? And really enable everyone, democratizing the approach to analytics for every person at every skill level, enabling them to participate in the analytic process and provide their creativity and domain expertise to help solve the greatest challenges of their particular organization or university. From an Alteryx perspective, we live this analytics for everyone, in that our analytic platform allows for any data anywhere to be ingested, to conduct every analytic process from extract, load, and transform, to data prep and blend and enrichment, to creating analytics reports and doing geospatial analysis, to data science, auto machine learning, and natural language processing. And really, the most important thing is be able to share that insight out to a number of reporting and visualization platforms, really enabling every level of data worker, whether in IT, whether a data engineer, whether an analyst or a business user, to be able to participate in the overall analytic process. So that's it. You didn't come here to really hear from me. I want to turn it over to our colleagues and our guests, our partners, Emily Coleman, who's the co-founder and CEO of HAI Analytics, and Jen Cox, who's the co-founder and COO. We're going to talk a little bit specifically about what they see, some of the challenges that colleges and universities are facing in their enrollment strategies. So Jen, Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Andy, and thanks to everyone for being here. I'll give you a little bit of background on sort of who we are and what we do, and then Jen will walk you through the more technical application of how we're using Alteryx to really create a unique offering in the higher ed space. So we founded HAI almost 4 years ago. Jen and I have both worked our careers in higher ed. I started out 20 years ago at Syracuse University. I started out as a research analyst in enrollment management and gradually sort of grew into more leadership roles and more admissions and financial aid planning. I went from there to a higher ed consulting company, which is where I met Jen. We worked there together for about 5 years. We oversaw the predictive modeling group. So we built predictive models for every stage of the student life cycle. We did financially leveraging, among other things. And then Jen and I decided to found our own company 4 years ago, based on some principles that we had around transparency. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Andy, can you go to the next slide? So in terms of the things that we do at a very high level, we do predictive modeling, we do inquiry to applicant, yield modeling, retention modeling. We do financial aid leveraging, helping institutions to spend their financial aid dollars strategically. We do data process improvement and automation, and Alteryx plays a big role there. Reporting, and then we do data tracking and visualizations. And we work with several higher ed clients and sort of offer consulting around those things as well. You can go to the next one, Andy. So what makes us unique? And I'm going to focus really on two of these, but I'll just mention that our strategies are customized. So we don't apply any sort of preconceived grid or any cookie cutter approach to anything that we're doing with our clients. If we're developing a financial aid strategy, it's unique to the client, it's based on their data, their mission. And so that's sort of our starting place. But the other two things that I think really make us unique are that we have a completely transparent methodology and we offer real-time data visualization. And Alteryx is crucial for both of those things. So we heard from prior clients that they were frustrated with the sort of black box nature of financial aid leveraging, of the recommendations they were getting from their predictive modeling vendor. They wanted to understand that more. We felt like, they should. It's their data. These are, statistical models. There's nothing proprietary. So we wanted to, develop this offering really based on the principle of being transparent. In some cases, that means that our clients are trying to, or they're working toward bringing all of these capabilities in-house. And we help with that. So we help sort of transition to where they don't need us anymore and they can do the analytics in-house. And that, we consider that a success if they start doing it on their own. We also offer, as I said, real-time data visualization. So another big frustration was that the client institutions saying that, they're working with a vendor who provides data visualizations, but they're not frequent enough. They're, weekly, sometimes even monthly throughout the admission cycle. They're not, even when they're updated, the data are kind of 2 days old. And, we know from working in this field that, that just isn't enough for enrollment managers, especially throughout the spring. You need to be able to kind of track things every day. So we developed a tool using Alteryx and Tableau, which Jen will show you, that allows our clients to very quickly and easily update their own data. And when I say easily, it's like a 4-second process. And that will update the entire dashboard that we've built. They can do that as often as they want, essentially giving them real-time data visualizations throughout the cycle. Can you go to the next one, Andy? So I think I already sort of mentioned this before, but we do predictive modeling for kind of every stage of the student life cycle. Our philosophy is that, every stage needs to be taken into account to set up an admissions and financial aid strategy that's successful. So we want to know what's happening at the top of the funnel. We want to know what's happening with retention. We want to make sure that the financial aid strategies we're recommending have a positive impact or neutral impact on retention, certainly not a negative impact. So that's just kind of our general approach. You can go ahead, Andy. For those of you who perhaps are not, as familiar with predictive modeling, I just wanted to give a couple sentence overview of it. So what we're doing is we're using known results data, and we're typically building models on the prior 3 years worth of data. And we create an algorithm that will predict future outcomes. So various models can be tested. There are a lot of different types of statistical models, machine learning, other AI models. And these can be tested against each other to find the model with the strongest predictive power. All of that can be done within Alteryx. And because the models are multivariate, they tend to be highly accurate. And so we're using Alteryx to organize, merge, and clean data, build the models, and create the data visualizations for that real-time tracking. So with that, I will hand it over to Jen.
Thank you, Emily. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Bear with me. Okay, so we have a couple of demonstrations for you. We're actually going to start at the very end, the final output of the work that we're talking about. And we think that will provide some additional context before we look under the hood at all of the powerful work that Alteryx Designer is doing. And we know that the data that you're looking at evolves quite rapidly. We know that it takes a lot of time and effort to recruit a new class of students. It can be a multi-year process. And at a minimum, we recommend that schools are actively looking at their data on the potential enrolling pool throughout at least an academic year or admission cycle. So what we've done is we've created a dashboard. This piece is done in Tableau, and we're looking at the number of students who have applied, been admitted to an institution, and who have deposited, the net deposits. And we're looking at a particular point in time. So currently, in this demonstration, it's the end of April. In reality, clients are typically updating this data at least weekly, very often daily. So it would be typically more current, but just for the example's sake, looking kind of end of April. So we have kind of the current results, and we also have at the same point in time in the previous 2 cycles, how many students we had at that point. And we also have, this is just designed, this first tab or first page within the dashboard, to be a very high level overview. So in that spirit, we also have some high level demographics. In this case, it's the male to female ratio. We have geography, where the students are coming from. And if we hover, we can specifically see the number of cases in each state. For some of you, it might be more regional based institution, or most of your students are coming from in-state. These types of visualizations could be done at the county level or at the zip code level, whatever is kind of most relevant to you, and whatever demographics are most important for you to see. And you'll notice we have kind of the same metrics displayed in different formats throughout the dashboard. And here we have the racial and ethnic diversity at the institution, what proportion of students fit into various categories. And then very important for our partner institutions, for us to kind of regularly monitor, are the financials. How much financial aid has been offered to students? How does that compare to the previous cycle? What does the tuition discount rate look like? What do revenues look like in total and also on average? Again, these could be different metrics if you need to break out unfunded aid, but also look at funded aid. That all can be incorporated into an additional visualization here. And then again, just at a high level, we're looking at the yield rate and how that has changed over time. And in this case, this institution is enjoying a nice increase in their yield among admitted students. And then we can also see academic credentials. Again, if these types of credentials are not as relevant, maybe you need to be tracking ACT or SAT scores, things like that, that too can be displayed. One really important feature, in addition to being able to update this as often as you'd like in a matter of seconds, everything is interactive. So if I just click a visualization, in this case, I've just selected New York. Now all of the numbers have updated to reflect just students in that particular state. So for example, we see that, despite being well ahead in net deposits overall, and well ahead in yield, in New York, for example, which happens to be a high volume state for this particular institution, the yield rate is actually down, and they're maintaining enrolls, and they had more admitted students. So this can be useful. Again, it's at a high level, but just to kind of diagnose what's going on, and we can really interact with one filter and multiple filters if desired. Another feature that is included throughout the dashboard is the ability to change the date that we're sort of reviewing the data in. So right now, the data is current as of April 22, which in this scenario would be today, and for the demonstration's sake. If we wanted to understand what the numbers looked like April 1, we would just click this calendar, and all of the figures would update to show how many admitted students we had at that time, how many deposits for all 3 years. And then these kinds of dashboards also have the ability to, we showed you how you could filter based on geography and gender, but you could have drop downs, check boxes, things like that to show just a subset of the population. In this case, we're talking about all students, or we could filter down just to the modeling population, which if you're familiar with this work, you know that when we're creating statistical models, we often remove students from that core analysis who may bias the model because of a pretty different treatment or different recruitment or aid allocation. So thinking faculty, staff, children, tuition remission, sometimes internationals, and sometimes D1 athletes. That differs from one school to the next. So again, you could just kind of click that, and then all of the numbers, including the financials, would update to just reflect the selection. So the next tab is our yield summary, and it's a more detailed view of the data. And so it's still the same 3 years worth of information. And we're looking at different categories of students and reviewing the number of admits, the active admits, and the net deposits, as well as the yield. So, at its core, we're looking at kind of the same types of information displayed a bit different in a different manner and more detail. So we're looking at the number of students in each category here. We can also toggle to the proportion of students, the proportion of class, or the proportion of the admits, to see kind of how the trends have changed. Very often, it's important for us to look at the raw numbers of frequency, but also really important for us to kind of look at the proportions and how those are shifting, especially if we want to track kind of high or low yielding populations and how that's contributing to the overall. Again, we have this comparison date filter if we wanted to backtrack or fast forward. If you wanted to fast forward to census, for example, to see kind of what happened over the summer, you could simply do that here. So as I said, we're looking at various measures of interest: race and ethnicity, geography, whether it's domestic or international student, gender. We could look at program. Really any attribute that you have available in your data can be used to create a dashboard like this, so long as you have kind of the tools available, which we'll show you in Alteryx Designer how we do that, and how that kind of funnels into this dashboard for kind of real-time interactive visualizations. So we have various categories here, as I mentioned, really anything that you might want to know: commuters, residents, FAFSA filers, etc. Again, we have academic credentials. We can see that among the admitted student pool and the deposit pool. In this case, we've been looking at active admits and deposits, but a lot of our partner institutions instead want to know this information starting at the applicant level. So we'd either add a column here, or we wouldn't include the active admits, and instead you could see kind of that slightly more complete funnel picture of what's taking place for that particular cycle. And then again, tend to be very important are the financials. We can see here we've included the average EFC, demonstrated financial need, total aid, average aid, discount rate, and then of course revenues, both in the average and in the total and for different types. In this case, we're looking at tuition revenue. A lot of institutions, they're more focused on tuition and fees revenue. Again, it's all completely customizable. As is the case with the last page that we looked at, we can filter by simply clicking one or more rows. And then once we do so, we can see that all of the numbers will update. And here we're looking at non-legacy. We can see how kind of that breakdown exists and look for patterns in the data about where trends are shifting, where we may need to make some mid-course corrections, including the financials. So in this case, for whatever reason, the legacy students, we're seeing an uptick in the discount rate. We're also seeing a global increase in discount rate. So it's likely not just among non-legacy students. I just kind of picked that category as an example, but really easy to use. You can just click and unclick different rows to apply different filters. And then, as I said, everything will update from there. We're also, regularly checking, breaking this up into different segments of the pool. Schools very often, and for good reason, want to look at the cross-section of academic credentials and demonstrated financial need, or EFC. Many times we would set this up in alignment with the financial aid strategy if you're currently using a matrix-based approach. So for this example, we're looking at tiers 1 through 5, where the ones are the highest credentialed students, and we're looking at different levels of EFC. But you may be working with a 10 by 10 matrix, or you may be working with not even a matrix-based approach. So again, all of these things are customizable. Tableau is easy to use, as is Alteryx Designer, which is kind of powering a lot of these insights. So here, we're looking at the admits, the deposits, the yield, average institutional aid. We might also add, total aid, average revenue, the difference in aid between admitted students and non-admitted students. All of that can be available. And then, of course, looking at how that compares to the previous year. And we could also put in what are the goals? How many admitted students were we hoping for? And what do we expect that to yield, to kind of pinpoint specific cells where we may want to address with additional outreach. Here we have kind of drop downs, selections to look by program, could also look by race and ethnicity, or other things that are of particular interest for you. So this next tab is, again, it contains a lot of the same information, but it's simplified to kind of remove some of the noise of the last tab. And this is really core to the predictive modeling at the yield stage. So when we build predictive models, we're predicting the future. We're trying to predict the future. So we have to make a lot of assumptions about what the future applicant and admitted student pool will look like. And that's often based on the last few years of historical data. It could also be based on a school moving to the Common App. We know that we're going to expect more admits, and that we may expect a decrease in the yield, things like that. So we really just closely want to monitor how our assumptions are aligning with reality, and just in general, what trends may be influencing the end of cycle outcomes. So here we're just looking at the admitted student pool by year, and this again, it is based on a particular date in time, and we're looking at the number. Again, we can toggle to the percentage, and again, everything is filterable. Here we've added another kind of visualization showing the magnitude of change. That's what the colors are associated with from one year to the next. So for example, we saw that New York was kind of a lower yielding population as compared with some of the others, and we can see that there's a bit of growth within the admit pool there, and that could be contributing to potentially a lower discount rate overall. In the case this institution, that's not happening. They're overall enjoying a higher yield rate. But you can kind of see how we would use this to kind of diagnose potential problems that may impact the predictive modeling and also impact the goals that we have. Related to the predictive modeling, we have a tab here that assesses our progress toward goals. So it's containing the metrics that the institution finds to be most important for you. These are probably different, but we're looking at the current results on the modeled pool and the current admits and the current enrolls, the yield rate, and then again, the metrics of interest for them, including the financials. And we're also including a statistical projection. And this is a projection using the current live admitted student pool, running every student through the yield model, and then rolling those individual student probabilities into a total class projection of where, statistically speaking, we expect to end up. So it looks like this institution gets a lot of activity, probably at the end of April, and maybe even throughout the summer, because at this time they had 783 students, and we're projecting 414 students compared with a goal of 1390. So we can also look at the discount rate and then the projected revenues, and that's all being driven by the yield modeling and deployment through Alteryx Designer. If we wanted to, it looks like for this institution, they're going to achieve their goals. If we, saw a lower projection than anticipated, or if we saw results that, based on what we're seeing demographically, that kind of don't align with what the projection says, we may kind of further study what's going on and find areas where, maybe we need to admit more students, maybe we need more financial aid out there, or maybe we're going to so exceed our goals. We don't have capacity on campus, which is a totally different kind of problem. But, this can really help us assess where we are in real time. So that's kind of a very quick demo of the dashboard. As I said, it's very easy to update. It takes a matter of seconds, and I'm just going to show you that now. So I'm just going to open Designer first. So this takes a matter of seconds, and we've created an analytic application that's in Alteryx Designer that basically takes raw data, processes that data, and then feeds it into this live dashboard. So you don't have to kind of open up the full Designer platform. We are going to in this demonstration, but for folks who are not as comfortable with kind of interacting with the tools and some of the functions, these applications can be designed for really any user, if you are familiar with using a computer, which you all are. So in this case, we've asked the user to select a file, and then we're just kind of asking the user to pick a date, and this will be fed into the dashboard as kind of the default date. The data is current as of June 28th, as an example. So you just select the file, you hit finish. For the sake of brevity, I won't click finish, but it takes, as I said, a number of seconds to kind of cycle through and then push that to the dashboard based on the new data. And I'm just going to pivot to the entire workflow. If you just wanted to kind of sort of set it and forget it and kind of run the application quickly, that would be everything that you would have to do what I just demonstrated, that selecting the file and hitting finish. But this is kind of what the back end looks like. And some users will want to be kind of manipulating the tools and changing the output. So I'll give you just kind of a brief orientation to Designer, and then we'll kind of walk through what's happening in the workflow and how the tools are configured. And so this is Designer. These tools, these icons are tools, and they each have a very specific function. So these are data input tools. As you can see here, I have kind of what looks like a flat file. I'm actually pulling in an Alteryx database file. This could be an Excel file, a CSV file. If you're using SPSS, if you're using SAS, it can handle like every type of file, which is great. So I'm pulling in data, and it gives me a preview of the data down at the bottom. And when I click on a tool, it gives me tool configuration. So if I, wanted to change the file and I didn't want to do that in the application, I want to do it in the workflow like I'm doing now, I would just kind of select a new file, and that's really all I have to do. So we have the current data, which contains admissions and financial aid data. We also have, for the current cycle, we also have this for the previous year's cycle. And we're using a union tool here to combine those two data sets. So we have lots of different join types. We have lots of tools that allow us to manipulate and prepare the data. Really anything that you want to do with data that might be cumbersome in Excel, this can be, kind of replace all of that. And then there's a lot of things in here that you can't do in Excel. So really robust predictive modeling, AI, machine learning, both building and deploying. And you'll see kind of in this workflow that that is kind of a core feature of this particular workflow that we've built. So I'll just kind of move along here to show you some of the other tools that we use that influence the output into the dashboard. So it's a code-free platform. There is kind of this XML view if you're used to coding and that's kind of your speed. You can, interact with it in this way, but it's really designed for all kinds of users. So, you could just select different variables. There's actually a drop down if you want to do a basic filter where I could have just said, I only want to see this report on freshmen. The dashboard that I showed you is just freshmen, but very often schools are looking at both freshmen and transfers or having separate dashboards. So in this case, we're looking for full-time freshmen or first-time students. We're using a lot of different formula tools where we can very quickly and easily do calculations. Let me just find one. So, we're creating new variables. We can sum two different fields together, all really easy. We're also able to dedupe the data if we want. If we just look at this stream here, we can see that before I've deduped the data, I have 37,500 roughly. And after I've identified 40 cases that are duplicates, and I don't want to count individuals twice. So that's a really nice feature, kind of saving you some time in Excel potentially, or offering an opportunity to kind of upload this output and remove the duplicates in your CRM potentially. As we said, we're often deploying predictive models with our clients. So here we have a yield model embedded in the workflow. This was built in another Alteryx designer workflow using the predictive tools, and we're just deploying that here. If you have any questions about that process, we train a lot of schools on building predictive models and then deploying them in an effort to become self-sufficient. So we can always chat offline about that. We're pulling in the model, and every student in this stream, they're being run through that yield model. So all of the significant predictors of enrollment for a particular institution and their various weights, depending on where students stand on those variables, will calculate a probability for enrollment for every case within the data. So if I look here, I can see, it's going to score. It's not going to score some students if you're missing a data point, like you're missing your GPA or you're from the previous year. But I can see that some students, this is the probability. It's just appended that now. And the student, for example, is very likely to enroll. We have various tools here, again, to kind of just transform the data. I can append the goals that we have. So that we can track those in the dashboard. So I could, if the goal changes from 1390, we can change that here and update it. And then when we hit run, it will update that within a matter of seconds. Finally, we have two kind of key pieces of output through Designer. There's tons of reporting features in Designer, even Designer's own dashboarding tools, which are really great. Spatial analytics, really, you name it. The two I'd like to focus on here is the publish to Tableau server tool. And that's connecting right into the dashboard that we demoed. So it's a live feed. I'm telling it where to go, and it's going to publish a hyper file. And that's what Tableau is going to use. And then it will visualize the data. And the other thing that is pretty standard for a workflow like this that we're building is to output the predictive model insights. So here I'm just telling, I don't need every field that exists on the students. And I really want to understand among the 2020 admitted student pool, how likely or unlikely students are to enroll. So I have the student ID here, I have their current status. Some of the students have deposited or we're marking them as enrolled, depending on the time in the cycle. I have their state residency. It's not critical, but if you wanted to give this information to counselors for outreach efforts, that might be useful if you're doing it, if it's geography based for you. And then we have the probability for enrollment, as well as a grouping assessment of the likelihood. Sometimes these broad probabilities without kind of the context of how that relates to others is not as meaningful. So we have kind of assessment here where the 10s are the most likely to enroll. And then just kind of a categorical high, medium, low. So we may kind of find pockets of students where they're pretty likely to enroll. They have a probability that's higher than the average, but they have not yet deposited. So we may, implore the counselors to kind of check in and see if there's any more information that they need or what have you. We've instructed Alteryx Designer, or configured it to create an Excel spreadsheet, and that's through an output tool. So it's going to be in Excel, it could be CSV, whatever really you would need. And then this can be uploaded to your CRM, and every student record now has the predictive model insights. If you wanted to, you could extract the entire workflow and all the variables you added. So beyond just kind of dashboarding, a platform like Alteryx Designer can be so useful in doing a lot of the data transformations and calculations that maybe your CRM doesn't have as a feature, or it's time consuming to do so. So that's kind of it for our demonstration of the two. If there are questions, we can certainly dive back in. And with that, I'll just hand it back over to Andy.
Great. Hey, thank you very much, Jen. That's fantastic stuff. So let me just, you started this both to you and to Emily. You've been in the higher ed space for a while. You've kind of seen, analytics, kind of the importance of analytics. In your perspective, how is analytics, the role of analytics for colleges and universities changed? And how important is predictive analytics now?
I think it's the importance is, it's crucial basically. And I think what the growth and interest in it sort of mirrors that in the, in the corporate sector, where it's becoming more and more important. Schools that don't have that capability are realizing that, they're gonna fall behind, and the market for students is more and more competitive each year. They have limited financial aid dollars. So, for all of these reasons, schools really need to be using predictive models and predictive analytics to be as strategic as they can when it comes to both, who they're admitting, how they're admitting, and how they're aiding students.
Yeah. So, Emma, you mentioned, really how important it is to be transparent, right? And I think when Jen walked through that, I get a real, I'm not a technologist. I'm not a, I'm not a chief data officer. I'm not a, I'm not a classically trained data scientist. But you could really see how, the analytics was done. And so when you're talking to people, how important is that? When you say, oh, this is how we build a predictive model, can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. It's rare that it's not important at all to a client that we're talking to. There are some that would, they sort of want to see it to see how it's being done, but they don't want to get involved and, try to manipulate things themselves. And then on the other end, there are clients where they really want to develop these capabilities in-house. And so it varies from client to client and who they have on their team. But what we're doing, the kind of offering that we have that's built around Alteryx, is unique in that we can help them get to the place where they're doing it themselves. And they have a code-free tool to do it. And they become self-sufficient. So I think there's going to be, there will be more and more schools asking for that. And wanting to have a lot more control over these things.
Yeah, cool. So I was just watching some of the polling questions, and I think it may have been the third polling question was like, what type of analytics platform do you have now? And some of the slate was up there and things like that. But the one that came back was really dashboards, right? So obviously Tableau we know is widely deployed, and Tableau's a fantastic tool for visualization and so forth. But Jen, you kind of lived that. You showed a great dashboard, but how do you build? How does Alteryx really enable you to build that dashboard? Right? What if you didn't have that Alteryx capability? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's critical to have something like Alteryx to do a lot of the computing and processing. I think Alteryx Designer is unparalleled in the market, just in terms of different types of users that can use it. To do these kinds of things in legacy systems can be quite cumbersome and very often impossible. A lot of the CRMs that are out there don't allow for predictive modeling. They don't have that capability. And if they do have the predictive modeling, there's no availability for folks to kind of do that in-house. It's kind of that black box nature where the company is kind of supplying those services. So in order to really do that, you need something where you can kind of build the models, monitor the models, tweak the models yourselves. And so, yeah, it's essential. I think a lot of the other option we see is folks using Excel, and we've all used Excel, and it has its advantages for sure, but it's just very labor intensive. It doesn't allow for processes to be quickly replicated and automated, and so that's why Alteryx Designer is very powerful, because you can see how easy it is to just kind of do all those things and then save a workflow that kind of does everything from soup to nuts.
Cool.
And we have there's a question someone typed in, or is it okay if
Yep, go ahead, yep.
Okay, so the question is, how do you respond to critics of analytics who say that utilizing models exacerbates bias and expands income inequalities? This is something that we feel very strong about. And, we do hear that criticism. And what I would say is that if you're not using a multivariate model, then you are letting those biases be in there. So, you can look at a school, we see this with merit aid, that if you look at the correlation between who's getting, the amount of merit aid people are getting and their family income, it's a very high correlation. So you're basically, giving the wealthier students more money. But a model can sort of help tease those independent effects apart. It can, bring those sort of biases to light that, schools aren't trying to, to be biased in that way, but they really need to be able to kind of see it in the data to be able to address it. And the other thing I would say is that, HAI stands for human and artificial intelligence. And Jen and I really believe that models need to be interpreted by people who have worked in the field, who have experience implementing these models, to make sure that those biases don't get introduced. So that's, kind of a lot of what we do, and a lot of what we are teaching our clients to do is to make sure they're being very careful in the interpretation of the models.
I would also just add, we, as Emily said, this is very core to our kind of values and philosophy. That's why we take kind of the full student life cycle approach that Emily walked through. So anytime we're doing yield modeling and financial aid leveraging, and that's not the only reason schools come to us. We do a lot of kind of other things, but a lot of the schools we're working with, it is on the leveraging basis. And anytime we're setting up, building new financial aid strategies, in addition to a yield model, we're also building a retention model. And any financial aid strategy, we're providing yield projections of what the class composition, the enrollment revenues will look like in year one. But we also use the retention model in tandem to see what the projected 2-year forecast is. And sometimes we see that a strategy that looks really good in year one, where a client can maybe reduce the discount rate or be really efficient and lean in some areas, maybe that looks really great in year one. But in some cases, over 2 years, actually nets less revenue because it leaves more students, particularly low-income students, at kind of more vulnerability with a higher net cost and an unmet need. So kind of not necessarily around kind of the bias of statistical modeling, but just kind of this bias of looking in a very sort of narrow window and kind of a vacuum of enrolling a class for 1 year, when we know that ideally we like to see them for 4 years.
Right. No, that's great. And and Emily, you hit right on the point. The whole thing about, we call it analytics for all. You can call it upskilling. You can call it democratized analytics. But really being to apply, that domain expertise, right? Knowing the pitfalls, right, so to speak, that may be contained in your data, right? Because if you just do you just code something in R or Python, you leave it to a data scientist, they may or may not have that domain expertise, right? So you need to be able to apply that domain expertise so people know what questions to ask, where the soft spots are, and so to speak, really get underneath that. And I think, as Jen showed you, you can really look at that data, right, in its raw form, and be able to, get some quick hitting insights as to, what may be a problem, to address some of those, the biases, that, that, like you said, Emily, colleges and universities are not trying to intentionally have bias. They're trying to obviously fight the bias. And I think embedding everybody and having that analytics for all kind of mentality, that team sport, and applying that domain expertise is absolutely critical, to fighting some of those biases. So I just want to thank both Jen and Emily for taking their time out today, to share with us their insights on this. I think they bring some tremendous capabilities. So I urge you to follow up if you're listening. As Savannah indicated, I'll turn it back over to her. We will make this material available and do any follow up, but please feel free to reach out to us if you so wish, and we'd love to talk to you. So.